Our next speaker is Alesja Serada. She's from European Humanities at the University of Vilnius. And the title of her presentation is Free-to-Play Games Between Good and Evil, the Case of Rewarded Video Ads. So, please welcome Alesja.
How should I start it? Yay!
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you for introduction. Thank you for introduction. I'm here with a little side project. It's a fact that I had to work in some quite exploitative industries to pay for my studies in critical theory. So I will be talking about the ambiguity of exploitation on an example that has started as an attempt to make better free-to-play games. So likely or not, the object of my studies has spoken again since I've submitted the presentation and my initial idea, and it has been a little bit revised since then. But anyway, I would rather expect that the next thing that will cause quite a rush online will be the rewarded ads model of monetization. Of course, after this gambling issue is resolved. Watching rewarded ads is presented now as a model relatively non-coercive, probably fair, and most importantly, it's the player's own choice to play games and watch advertising to pay for those games. But I still see this as problematic, and today I'm presenting it. Firstly, I present the current state of criticism of free-to-play games. Then I reveal exploitation in so-called good free-to-play games, which are based on rewarded ads. And finally, I problematize negative assessment of exploitation because it's rather problematic, surprisingly. And in the end, I make my own assessment of exploitation in free-to-play games. So here we go. Due to critical stance of many academics with their rhetorics not quite persuasive of exploitationware and shit crayons, it's a hard job now to discuss exploitation analytically and in a reasonable manner in games, because most critical articles simply list all marketing models and marketing techniques in free-to-play games, and this is enough to label them exploitative. But anyway, at the same time, the proponents of gamification propose to use quite the same techniques to for some better good, for the greater good, such as in educational software, work management, or healthcare. For them, appropriation of the subject's agency is acceptable as long as it corresponds to their own moral values. I call this the Clockwork Orange argument, or the syndrome of Clockwork Orange. Still, there is enough evidence, of course, that free-to-play games can be morally ambiguous, to say the least. And generally, critics accuse free-to-play game publishers of exploitation because they exploit cognitive biases, and now we will see a list of, I would say, game marketing 101, a lot of quite manipulative techniques that can be found in most free-to-play games. Gambler's fallacy, near-miss effect, hot hand fallacy. You can make your own research on that. It's heavily criticized, so you won't be short of evidence that actually, yes, free-to-play games can be quite exploitative. We just need some better analysis to deal with that. And For example, the famous case of loot boxes is basically manipulative randomness, because when we talk about loot boxes, we forget that this randomness can be manipulated, and it most certainly is. So, as a response to all that bad, as a response to all that criticism, the game industry is trying to distance themselves from those evil kinds of free-to-play games, even though AAA games publishers already have started using the free-to-play model in different variations. They try to label it as games as a service now. Quite interestingly, this term games as a service, it has been used for quite several years. For example, one very notable example, I really like it because it looks like this game designer actually wanted to make to write a good book, to do something good. So Oscar Clarke, he wrote a book, Games as a Service, how free-to-play design can make better games. What's wrong about that? What possibly could go wrong? And it was a genuine attempt to play fair. To make for game designers to make the deliberate choice not to use coercive and manipulative monetization methods. And Oscar Clarke used to be very active proponent of so-called rewarded ads monetization model. Unfortunately, it went a little differently in the real life, so we are going to see how it went. Anyway, this concept of games as a service is quite popular now, and of course it includes different ways of monetization, different ways of existence of free-to-play games, both casual and hardcore. It includes subscription, it includes in-game purchases, but we will focus on rewarded ad model because it seems less coercive, and it is framed as the most fair. What's wrong with that? Okay, they often so-called rewarded ads or rewarded video ads. They are often presented as a remedy against exploitative game design in free-to-play games. And one of the first and better-known examples is Crossy Road. In the ideal scenario, you don't have to pay in this game. You just watch some advertising if you want to win another cool character, and this character won't actually influence your game, the outcome of your game, which is one of very heavy points in the debate on loot boxes. But in the ideal scenario, it wouldn't be so. You watch advertisement, you win another cool character, it doesn't influence your game, so it's fair, and the game doesn't become rigged in favor of ad-watching players. Nevertheless, this game, although being quite remarkable and prized by game journalists, its achievements were commercially more or less insignificant. Of course, they made their $10 million in the first 3 months, but it would be nothing for a real free-to-play game where much more money is spent. So, and what everyone forgot to mention is that this ecology of rewarded ads is not unproblematic in itself. Who pays for those advertisements? Most of these best-paying advertisers are actually publishers of the biggest and the most exploitative game titles. So they can finance less exploitative games as a byproduct by serving advertisement through them. And this is only one point. Another point, more theoretical and more academic, is that watching advertising is also paying. We're not paying with real money, but we're paying with our attention. And this attention is quantified and commodified and bought and sold by social platforms and ad networks, just like a good old Karl Marx would explain in the same way as those abstract man-hours that we all know this model, which became like the basis for the industrial economy, heavily criticized by Karl Marx. So from this perspective, it's still exploitative because the player's time is alienated, and they voluntarily become an audience commodity. And so this alienation, it becomes even more sensible, and I'm addressing all this idle games discussion here. It becomes even more sensible when you actually don't watch this advertisement. So who is watching these 30 seconds of advertisement when the player is not watching them, when he or she just puts his phone away to wait until the video ad is over, and he or she can get his or her reward for watching it. From the marketing perspective, at this moment, players are a form of fraud, a null subject who exists only as a node in the advertising network where capital is circulating. And this is basically destruction of integrity that game designers were aiming for. There is no integrity anymore. So, and the logic of this capital circulating while we are watching or not watching, it was revealed even more clearly after this model of monetization has been accepted. Because if you look at the App Store now, the games that dominate the store, these short bite-sized arcade games, are mostly published by French publisher SketchUp or Voodoo. They are mostly based on the rewarded ads model, but the player basically has a choice between watching rewarded ads or non-rewarded ads in them. You can try it with most games published by Voodoo, for example, like Flappy Dunk or Snake vs. Block. Actually, they have published a bunch of games since I've submitted my work to this conference, so there are even more games like that. And it's in the same game situation, so they were finished. So you are like, you lose in a game, you have the choice to watch rewarded ads to continue, and you refuse to watch a rewarded ad, and then you still watch an ad because it's how capital works. It's just not rewarded. You're just watching advertisement video for free for those who serve these ads to you. So what started as a presumably fair way to pay to pay for a free game with your attention, it developed into even more coercive forms of free-to-play games, and which provide very little choice and basically very little agency for the player. Okay, this is evil, but what's wrong with that? The most powerful counter-argument in the free-to-play game debate is that millions of players seem to be satisfied with this economic model. And even worse, generally, game-specific forms of exploitation don't even fit into a normative understanding of exploitation. They're a marginal case, because based on the common understanding of exploitation, if the player accepts the game, then it means that he or she accepts the rules of the game, even if they are against his or her interests. And it also can be applied to free-to-play games with any model of monetization, and especially with advertisement. So, but what's wrong with that? In case of rewarded ads, the weakness is that it's in the assumption that players' time is free and exchangeable. I would argue that a player's attention is an unrenewable resource, because the time of our lives is finite, unfortunately. So is 30 seconds of our lives worth exchanging for 5 or more seconds of playing Flappy Dunk? And if yes, what is the fair exchange rate? And if we dare to ask about this exchange rate, doesn't it bring us back this old Marxist argument, Marxist model, and all those arguments about exploitation game. Okay, from the point of view that satisfied players share with the developers, free-to-play games can be seen as an example as a mutually beneficial exploitation, like here. This position can be supported by reasoning that I've met on Gama Sutra, of course, according to one quite popular game designer, McNeil, I'm quoting them in the article. So to evaluate exploitation in a game, the publisher should imagine a hypothetical customer who is making an informed and rational decision. Anyway, when we are in the situation of a game, we are already in an irrational state. The playing a game is not a rational decision as such. It's not the rational decision would be I would play this game because it is free, but as we've seen earlier, it's not the right way to reconstruct a free-to-play game. What makes it even worse? Karl Marx has never explicitly said that exploitation is bad, and why it is bad. Neither he stated that capitalism as such is unjust. Of course, when we say exploitation, we think about the Communist Manifesto. Here I have a quotation in Russian, which I wasn't really able to translate, but it says something like, under capitalism, a person exploits a person, and under socialism, it's vice versa. So a person exploits a person anyways. That's the problematic that we still have in free-to-play games and in digital economies. So when we talk about exploitation, we are talking about like these coercive conditions that I described in the Communist Manifesto, but of course we know that we are living in another time, so there was no it's not like this really economically enforced exploitation of early industrial workforce under those terrible conditions. We have another situation of exploitation. It's alienation that happens by choice, and that choice might or might not be ideologically blinded, because many players realize that they're playing a free game and they're paying with their attention, and they are okay with that. And this problem is not new. I'm going very quickly through really important slides of my presentation. So exploitation has been discussed. The followers of Karl Marx have been discussing the problem of exploitation quite for a long time with very little results. There have been attempts, like in Römer's famous essay, Should Marxists Be Interested in Exploitation, to distinguish economic exploitation from moral issues whatsoever, so making it a non-ethical case. Also, there have been a lot of attempts have been made, to explain them through the nature of capital. I actually like this argument, but it still needs a lot of explanation under it. So it's necessary. The current mode of production is is built so that it necessarily exploits, it necessarily contains exploitation in itself. And finally, there have been attempts to decline exploitation by applying to the idea of freedom. So exploitation is unfreedom. This is also problematic, as we need to go to this concept of freedom once again, and it would bring, if it wouldn't be too productive for us. So I haven't really found a lot of literature on free-to-play games, and from the perspective of political economy, so I just imagined what all these political economists would say about exploitation. So if the problem is the means of production, then players should be able to make their own games. That's a nice argument, and it's actually happening, but the economy is works absolutely differently, as we see. Free-to-play games basically, indie games basically survive by exploiting the exploiters, which is also supporting the whole system of exploitation in the digital market. Also, we should accept it because that's how the current post-industrial mode of production works, probably, but as we've seen, it can be really coercive and alienating, so probably we shouldn't accept something which is coercive and alienating. And in the end, probably we should just buy games and not play free-to-play games. But then it requires too much of moral commitment from a player. He or she should make some moral choice every time he or she would be interested in playing some free game. This is too much of a burden for a normal casual player. So, and finally, this is kind of a question without an answer. Unfortunately, there is no common ground to judge exploitation in games as bad, even if we intuitively feel that way. So why cannot free-to-play games be good? To start from, they wouldn't be economically sustainable without luring players into paying. And as a result, game design and marketing become merged together in such game. They become undistinguishable. And also on the technological level, which is in case of ad-based games, this is the advertising network, the ad-serving platform. And games, free-to-play games, just seem to reproduce this logic of the advertisement technological platform, which unfortunately works based on the logic of the capital circulating in it. But quite strangely, it definitely recognizes the logic of the labor theory of value, which is sometimes of no value in the real world. I mean, advertisements are mostly served based on the quantified time, like 30 seconds are the industry standard. If an ad has been served for 30 seconds, it would mean that the advertiser would pay the money, and then the ad network would receive the money and probably share some of those money with a game in which this advertising would be served. So I'm going into technical details here, but you can ask more about that because this definitely used to be my job. So even the least exploitative free-to-play games cannot provide economical relationships without exploitation as such, even though it cannot simply be labeled as bad. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Questions, Sebastian?
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Yeah, my question is about your central concept, pretty much, exploitation. I really didn't get who's being exploited and why. So to me, it sounds like I'm giving my attention for a certain amount of time and I'm getting something back. So that's a free exchange of goods and services. And unless you're willing to say, well, all exchange of this type is somehow exploitation, which would just beg the question. I would. So you said it's not. It's hard to tell what's wrong with exploitation. I would just go a step back and see what's the exploitation you're seeing there.
Mm-hmm. What you are saying is exactly the problem I was trying to deal with. Of course, if we go deeper into post-Marxist theory, it would be we are giving away a part of ourselves by spending the time of our life symbolically on watching advertisement, or by doing another, doing other kind of blunt and from our point of view useless mechanical work, and when we do it at those exact time when we are watching advertisement, or when we are doing those mechanical and useless, not useless, useful for those who pay for it, those senseless work, at this time of our life we are alienated from ourselves. That would be like classical answer to your question. I'm not saying that I agree with that. I can feel it, but I don't have good theoretical or practical grounds to argue for that.
Yeah.
So, now I remember to click the mic. So one thing that you did not address is that many of these games, or maybe even all of them, free-to-play games, there's this notion of whales. It is sort of a derogatory term, but this is what the industry uses, so that's why I'm referring to it. Namely, rich people who spend a lot of money, or people who can afford spending a lot of money on these games. We're talking about a couple of $10,000 a month, for example, right? So this is more or less this type of player, right? And it has been recognized that many of these games actually prey on existing of these people. So it's that the game exists to catch a few people like this, and then they can basically go on, and the economy is there because there are these 2 or 3 people. And there were some of the journalists reached to these people, and these actually are like Eurogamer has a new interview with one of these whales. There's also Kotaku interviews with other person like this, and they actually tell a very, I would say, scary story of being somehow locked in a weird position where they cannot stop spending because of some kind of social status that they achieved in a game. And they want to have this social status still, they want to be the best player. And because of that, they have to spend this $20,000 a month. So that's a very weird situation, and I would say ethically at least questionable.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's why I focused on advertisement-based monetization models, because there are no whales in this case. Of course, if you go deeper, you can see that some advertisers pay more for certain services. Anyway, in mass advertisement networks, there are like you simply cannot. If you pay for a game with your attention, you have a limited time of your attention that you can sell, so to say. So you can watch only a limited number of advertising videos while playing a game. That's why this exact monetization model is working a bit differently. Probably that's why there was hope at the beginning that it would be more fair. But in the end, it's still coercive, because when it started at something fair, now it just became, it resulted in free-to-play games being some kind of a commercial TV channel. So you play a game for 15 seconds and you watch an advertisement, a forced advertisement for 30 seconds, and then you play for 5 seconds more, and then you watch another advertisement for 30 seconds more. So it becomes, though when the economy of attention is maximized, it becomes this kind of a system which is still coercive. But you're absolutely right, and we could talk about whales a lot, but it's just the case of a different monetization model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we move on, and thank you so much, Alesja. And